So welcome. This session is called Refocusing on VR Innovation. Can standards simplify cross-platform virtual reality development? And that title was not made up by committee at all. This is part of today's Khronos Dev Day at GDC 2017. So my name's Alon Orbach. I'm from Samsung Electronics. And I work on standards and do various things within Khronos, specifically within the Vulkan. I chair the system integration subgroup. But don't worry, we're not just going to be discussing the joys of system integration as much as I think they are exciting, could easily fill an hour session today. So we've got a few brief slides before we kick off the panel session, a bit about what standards are currently delivering to enable VR. Then we're going to introduce a few of the Vulkan features that were announced yesterday by Khronos that are enabling VR apps and compositors. Then Nick is going to introduce OpenXR, which is the Khronos standard effort for VR. And that's going to be a brief overview of what we're up to and what we're doing towards having a standard for VR applications. Cass is then going to give a tribute to Johannes, who passed away earlier this year, the end of January, and did a lot to contribute towards the VR standards effort. And then we'll have a panel discussion with our fine panelists, which I'll introduce just before we get to that. Get ready with your questions. I want the panel to be as interactive as possible, led by you guys with all your issues and love for standards, as well as any pain you currently have targeting multiple VR devices, which I hear there's no pain at all, but we shall see as the session goes on. So, quick overview, Khronos. This is Neil's fine slide deck. We are a standards body that connects software to silicon. We have over 100 member companies. Anyone is able to join as a member, and our mission is to create royalty-free standards for the industry, primarily in the space of graphics, parallel compute, neural networks, and vision, and VR is the new area we're delving into. So this morning, if you were here with us, we discussed the web standards, where they are at the moment and where they're going. In today's session, we'll be covering a bit about the 2D and 3D, or 3D graphics APIs and what they're doing for standards, as well as I said, the OpenXR standard that we are just announced the name for. So that's what we're covering today. So what are open standards already doing for VR? So OpenGL ES and OpenGL are powering VR on millions of devices across the world. And recently, we just had the announcement from Valve of Steam VR beta using Vulkan to drive VR. WebVR, as Brandon talked this morning, is being powered by WebGL to deliver VR in browsers. And then the specific requirements that have developed as in the new modern phase of VR. The new feature of a VR compositor has come about because a VR compositor is somewhat demanding. It must display synchronous and front buffered. It must be absolutely rock solid to avoid users not feeling so well using VR. So really must avoid any judder or tearing to avoid vomiting, in the polite term. For practical reasons, the compositor has to share the GPU with the application. And so we've had extensions in EGL to deliver context priorities and front buffer rendering for the application in a well-designed way, so that a compositor can do beam racing for tiled architectures. Yeah, and specifically there's been vendor extensions to enable that for tilers. And then the demands of a stereo rendering application also provided a new opportunity, which is, thus far has been delivered by a vendor extension for multi-view. Instead of rendering almost the same thing for both eyes and having twice the CPU overhead, and then also redundantly doing vertex work, the app renders to both views at once. And that's a big win with driver overhead. But in the long term, GPU hardware can also be optimized to deliver for this feature with specific architecture designs. So, yesterday, the group has announced a bunch of what we call KHX experimental extensions. And in the afternoon session, Tom Olsen, chair of the working group, will explain a bit more about this. But the main thing is I want to just point out the disclaimer. This is Khronos looking to get feedback from developers. So they are experimental. They will be removed at some point. But we really want to know, are these the right design for how applications and compositors work? So there's a set of sharing extensions. There's ones which are per platform, whether it's file descriptor or Windows handle for sharing. So that's about cross-process sharing, but also cross-API sharing, so being able to take your work and textures from Vulkan to OpenGL or OpenGL ES. And then there's the multi-view extension. This is the first time Khronos is trying to standardize it as a eventually core or KHR feature. So that's currently the KHX multi-view extension, which I'll go into in a moment. And there's more features on the way, which we're discussing. So shared presentation is the equivalent of front buffer rendering, which we're working on, and to match the external semaphore extension, external fences. So a quick run through of multi-view for Vulkan. As I mentioned, experimental extension, just released yesterday, and it's accompanied by the Spear V extension that enables specifying the view index per shader. So it's based on OVR multi-view, which is the GL ES extension, but redefined to use render parsers in Vulkan. And its aim is to achieve the best performance across different implementations. So at least it'll be as fast as any other route you can take, be it geometry shaders or instancing, but implementations can then actually use that information, as we mentioned, to provide architecture-specific benefits. So just a quick recap, because I think I'm running out of time here. The other thing it enables, which is more Vulkan-specific, is being able to differ the commands within a command buffer between views. So having per command buffer differences, as well as being able to define your render pass associations per view, which is far more beneficial for tilers as well. So with that, I'm going to just give an overview of this afternoon. Do join us if you want to hear more about what we're doing with standards. There's an afternoon packed with lots of Vulkan goodness, including what's going on mobile, desktop, and the session at 4 p.m. And in case standards alone aren't enough to tempt you, there's also beer for the 4 p.m. session, should you wish to come join us again. If you do need a break from Khronos, but still want to talk about VR, there's a session this afternoon run by Imagination about mobile graphics and the future of VR. And on Wednesday, there's a couple other sessions by Khronos member companies, including the well-titled Mobile, the Future of VR, which is not at all a controversial statement, as far as I understand. And also, just to point out that given Alchemy have joined us today in the session, there's also a couple of opportunities to hear about the fun of Job Simulator and other games from Devin, including one session today at 3:30. So I'm going to pass over to Nick, who is our working group chair for OpenXR. Thanks.
Thank you, Alon. There we go. We're pleased to announce that the Khronos VR Initiative, as we were formerly known, now has an official name and delightful logo, thanks to the efforts of the committee and Neil and our marketing department doing it. We ended up on the pink to purple end of the color spectrum. We went from eye-bleeding pink to a more tame. I've been reminded that purple is the color of royalty. So we're a very regal group, off to an auspicious start. Basically, we've only been going as an official working group for a little bit over a month, but we're already kind of making really good progress. I think everybody was a little bit surprised at how quickly we were able to come to consensus on certain things and already start into productive technical discussions. Externally, the question we get most is, whether or not now is a little bit too early with VR to start standardizing. And I think some people, especially Yuval, who's been in this for a few years, would argue that VR isn't necessarily nascent, but this latest generation of VR is, fairly new. In the past couple of years, we've seen a nice boom in VR technology in the consumer marketplace. Aside from that, there's already sort of patterns and commonalities that are starting to emerge that we think standardization can help address. And moreover, if you look at the current landscape, a VR application developer has to kind of deal with this nasty web of entanglements when they're trying to develop an app. Even if you're using an engine, you still have to do a significant amount of work in order to hit all the kind of addressable platforms out there. That's just a small fraction of those, largely represented on this panel, in fact. But there's a lot of work for application developers if they want to take the market. And as the market grows, that's a financial consideration for a small company. Where do they want to target? Where do they want to spend that effort? We're hoping that through standardization, we can take this nasty web and make it something a little bit cleaner by focusing on two parts. The application interface is kind of the higher level interface where applications and engines can develop towards a common API that kind of unifies things that we know are standard across all devices, things like tracking and presentation layer stuff. And then companies can implement their own runtimes in the middle, that interface with a device layer down below, so that hardware manufacturers, if they want to fit into this ecosystem, can build a device layer driver that's compatible and then have suddenly access to far more content. So it not only helps the application developers, but we're hoping that it also fosters some hardware innovation by getting them up with tractable content a little bit faster. And of course, standardization is nothing without partners. So this was the most recent one I was able to copy off of the internet, but the list seems to be growing by the minute of people that are willing to throw their name in the hat. And you can see by the list up there and by the people that are up here, we've already got a lot of the big key players in the industry. And we're hoping that because of that, we get a lot of unique perspectives and try to solve some of the problems that we'll probably be talking about here in a few minutes. And we also hope that because of this panel and talking about these issues, kind of spur some interest for other people that maybe have unique perspectives that we haven't been considering yet. We'll be inspired to join the initiative and become Khronos members and join in the discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to the venerable Cass Evett.
So I'm gonna put up a little prop here, I want to talk about John-Paul Van Waveren. He's a guy I've known for a pretty long time. I started working with id back when I worked at NVIDIA, and then worked at id, and then I work at Oculus, and so I've known him for a while. If you've done any game development where you were sort of looking at texture transcoding or things like that, you may have run across a lot of technical papers that John-Paul worked on. John-Paul was a really dedicated, dare I say, obsessive engineer. He really focused a lot on technical problems. John Carmack has said that he's the most talented programmer that he has ever worked with, and if you know anything about John Carmack, he doesn't bestow lavish praise. This is an exceptional engineer. But often when someone passes away, you don't get an opportunity to sort of see a picture of them and an in memoriam, and I wanted to say a few things about who John-Paul was to me. And part of it here is just to talk about some of the things that you wouldn't have seen. He was a very private person, but he loved life, and he did a lot of living in the short time that he was with us. So he liked to do things on boats. He had a boathouse in Canada. He was vacationed at waterfalls and on mountains. He was in the snow and the ice a fair amount. He was a friend of mine, and for a small group of people, a really, really close friend. He was Dutch, and we never let him forget that, and hence the orange from me today. And he loved rainbow unicorns, which is why Sparkle is up here as my prop. Thanks to Nick for bringing that. He was also a son and a brother, a husband, and just before he passed, he became a father. And he was a funny guy, you know. To be so technically minded, you wouldn't think it, but you know, not just a little funny. He was quite funny and willing to be self-deprecating. And we lost him at the end of January this year, after a pretty long battle with colon cancer. But what was amazing to me about him was that he never stopped living life. Even though the odds were tough and the news was frequently not good, he kept looking forward, always kept looking forward. And the last few months of his life he spent working on a proposal for OpenXR that turned out to be the proposal that this group adopted as its starting point. So everybody at Khronos is really going to miss him, and I just want to say thanks, JP.
And whilst I only had the pleasure of knowing JP for a few months, it was an absolute pleasure. And this is my best attempt at wearing pink that I could find today to honor him. We're now going to move to the panel discussion. So I do hope you have your questions ready. We have a great panel in front of us today. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing them all. I don't think Cass needs an introduction, but apparently he's a software engineer, and he also seems to like horrendous beers that taste like vinegar. If you follow him on Twitter, you'll find out all about those. We've got Devin Reimer from Alchemy, and I will never pronounce alchemy correctly with my British accent, so that's my best attempt. He's the Chief Technical Owl, which is a great job title, and I'd love to have that. And I really want Devin to challenge us as to quite how painful it is to develop across platforms and the task we have ahead of us. Kay, who is the spec editor of the OpenXR group, is a senior software engineer at Google with over 10 years experience in the game industry, now working in the Daydream team. Joe Ludwig from Valve, again, great title, programmer.
I can be the chief technical owl too.
An owl as well, okay. But I want to know more about your experience with virtual reality and hats, which does interest me. And then we got Nick Whiting, who introduced himself earlier, technical director at Epic Games, with a wonderful bio explaining that he's overseeing the development of award-winning Unreal Engine 4 virtual and augmented reality efforts. And then finally, Yuval Boger from Sensix, the CEO of Sensix, a key architect on OSVR, the open source virtual reality initiative. So I want to kick us off with a question to you all, to those working on standards. What has brought you to the Khronos OpenXR Standards Initiative? And I won't accept the answer, I drew the short straw, or my manager told me to. So, Cass, do you want to kick us off?
So I guess we were at the most recent, or the second most recent face-to-face meeting of Khronos when Joe came to present about wanting to form a VR standardization effort, and I think we sort of went in with a little bit of trepidation, but you know, as we started to think about it, we realized there's a lot of commonality in the APIs today, and it seems like maybe this is the right time for this. And maybe more than that, I would say any individual might think that, but what was impressive to us was the number of companies that all seemed to share the opinion that now does seem like the right time to start trying to form a cohesive vision.
You just want to go in order? All right. I personally, I'm very passionate about spelling standardize with a Z as opposed to an S.
You mean a Z?
Yes, sorry, a Z. So that's why I joined, just to be a counterpoint to Alon. But in reality, kind of my day job is working on Unreal Engine 4 and integrating all these VR platforms into one. And standardization is selfishly a way to make my life much easier by trying to limit the footprint of what we have to do. And we've kind of recently in UE4 been taking stock of the past few years of work towards integrating VR and AR headsets and realized that there's a lot of commonality between them. So we've kind of already been doing this exercise in miniature within the engine, and I wanted to kind of bring that experience to the group from the application side and the engine side.
So at Sensex, we've been doing VR for over a decade, so we've felt all the pain and suffering that customers had to do when they switched from one device to another. And a couple of years ago, we asked ourselves, well, when you buy a new printer, you don't have to upgrade your word processor, right? You just plug it in and some software gets installed and everything's fine. So why couldn't we have the same for VR? That's why we started the OSVR effort, which is an open source sort of multi-device middleware. And so we were ecstatic to hear about the Khronos group and thought that we might be able to contribute towards creating that standard.
Devin's not going to answer because he's not actually on the working group.
Devin gets a special question.
So given that we sort of started the ball rolling down the hill, we thought maybe we should and we did that because we've had the same, we've been on the receiving end of the experience that you've all was talking about. I think 4 years ago at GDC, I gave a talk about getting TF2 up and running on the Rift, on the DK1, and it wasn't just running on the DK1, it was also running on, I don't know, 5 or 10 other headsets that we'd accumulated from various other companies. And it was challenging to actually get all those different pieces of hardware to work. And so that was what caused us to spin up into OpenVR. And this is just the next logical step. You know, we always meant for that to be an open standard. It wasn't really when it was just controlled by Valve, but now we're, as part of OpenXR, we're pushing to have that be a real open standard that's established by the whole industry.
So from a company perspective, Google has always been very committed to open standards, whether it's Android or Chrome or other things. And why would VR be any different? And from a personal standpoint, I spent 10 years as a game developer, mostly working at Electronic Arts. And microphone. And I've just found so many times working with standards, open standards, was so much easier when we had them available, when we were able to do that. So one of the first principles of Daydream really is to try and make things easy for developers and users alike. And one of the ways we do make things easy for developers is to work with, and Nick can work with Unreal and Unity, and another way is to move forward is to work with these open standards and try and make things easier that way. So from a personal perspective, when we were working on this, I kind of jumped at the opportunity to take part because I think it's really important and I think it's the way forward.
So Devin, how easy was it targeting multiple platform with Job Simulator? How big a task do we have ahead of us in your mind?
Big. Bringing Job Simulator to HTC Vive and to Oculus Touch and PlayStation VR on day one is the hardest technical challenge that I've ever had to do in my career. It's also the most rewarding one. We wanted to get this content out to as many people as possible, and this is by far the best way to do that, is to target as many platforms as, in our opinion, can check the boxes of having a tracked head and a tracked hands as possible.
Does anyone want to chip in? Or, well, if people can prepare themselves with their questions, but in terms of the gulf we have between different performance on mobile VR versus desktop and console VR, do we think that we can easily, or how close can we bridge that gap versus when there's such diverse content between games? Don't know if you want to kick us off.
Nick should kick us off.
All right, sounds good. Kind of the perspective that we've taken with Unreal Engine is a lot of the things on the application layer, the abstraction of motion controllers, the abstraction of the camera controls, some of the rendering techniques to a little bit lesser extent are kind of transferable, right? We want to abstract those away so that the data is coming through in a kind of agnostic way. so application developers can focus on making the application and not worry about the specifics of the platform. So for instance, with the camera, if you're running on a fully 6DoF tracked thing, you get positional data and rotational data, whereas if you're running on a mobile device that has 3DoF tracking, we have perhaps a neck model, doesn't matter, but you still get the orientation in the same way. So we really try to push those hardware details as much as we can away from the user so you can deploy your content anywhere that's within performance targets. Obviously, you can't run PC content on a mobile device, but you shouldn't have to worry about some of the design considerations there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the big things that we noticed was that when you're trying to report a head pose, it doesn't really matter what kind of device is generating that head pose. What kind of technology is used for the tracking, and even if there isn't positional tracking, frequently you still want a position vector and a quaternion for orientation. And so these things, there are enough of them that are true across different platforms that we think a standard way of communicating it makes sense. Scaling for the hardware platform's capability to render complex things, for example, is just one that we will always have to do when we have such a high dynamic range and capabilities.
Hey, can I see indication? We've got a first question there. If you want to kick us off. And can I just see beforehand any indication of how many others? Anyone keen to ask us questions? Cool, there's a couple. If you could start making your way towards the mic, and we'll call you in after.
So it's been so often the case that when there's well-intentioned standards put together for various technical fields that we get these amazing standards and no one really ends up supporting them, or someone ends up coming up with a competing sort of proprietary standard past that. What do you guys think is the likelihoods of OpenXR and these standards getting broad spectrum adoption from basically everybody versus being sort of the standard versus the proprietary? For example, I noticed Microsoft's not on the list of supporters. So where do you see that going, and what strategy do you have going forward for addressing that sort of thing?
So at the face-to-face in Seoul, this was one of the questions that we got from some of the other people within Khronos, because there was a concern that this would be a thing that wasn't going to be broadly adopted. And at least from our side, we expect this to essentially replace OpenVR and be the way that you access all the devices that are using Lighthouse to track and that we're supporting as part of SteamVR. So we're expecting to put all our weight behind it, and as a result, that will be going forward, it'll be the way to support a significant number of devices. So that should drive adoption all by itself. But I'll let everyone else on the panel, speak for what their plans are. But we think that'll help.
I think standards benefit everyone. I mean, they benefit the consumers that want to know that they can swap devices over time and keep their content working, and they benefit the content producers who just want a larger market for their devices, and also for vendors, large and small, that want to access that kind of content. So standard does not mean there's not going to be differentiation between vendors, either on the hardware side or in the implementation of the runtime or in clever things that you can do as extensions. But our expectation, and you can see that by the number and caliber of the companies that are part of the working group, is that this will be super widely adopted. And I think we're off to a great start in making that happen.
I would say that one thing that really gave me a lot of hope is that at the Vancouver face-to-face, where we kind of really kicked off as a working group, it was something of a shared therapy session at the beginning, where everybody was talking about their problems and everybody realized there's a shared neuroses in the industry at the moment. And everybody was so quick to land on the starting thing. There was so much commonality there that it was very quick to get to the proposal that JP had helped form, and you decide that that's going to be a tractable starting point and we can iterate from there. And now the technical discussions have started blooming up, but I think the fact that that was so quickly recognized as something that everybody wants to make their lives easier, from that purely selfish perspective, I think we have a lot of hope for widespread adoption.
Yeah, and I think if we do our jobs well, adoption will be a natural course. That's at least our hope.
Do you want to get the next question in? And if you could introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Kale. I am a recent computer science graduate from the University of Hawaii. I'd just like to thank you all for being here. All your companies have been a huge inspiration to people like myself. Having just graduated, and for other people looking to get started in the industry, I'd just like to ask, would you focus on VR as a specialty getting started out, or is it something you find yourself more like evolving into it given more experience in the games industry?
Some people suggest like, hey, just start building games and then go to VR. I think that there is so much new stuff in VR that if you approach it with fresh eyes, you can do so much innovation in that space right now. So I wouldn't be afraid jumping right into VR and playing around and learning right there.
Let me say congratulations on finishing your degree. It's a great accomplishment, and I'm kind of excited to see what you do in the future. And I feel the same way too. VR is such a new space that we're going to be seeing things happening in the next couple of years that no one here has even thought of yet. And in fact, no one in this room has probably even thought of it yet. And you're probably going to be a big part of coming up with that. So I just encourage you to, like, if you have ideas, make them happen, because we're excited to see them too.
One thing that attracted me to VR is that it's such a multidisciplinary area. I mean, you could be an optics major and make huge contributions to VR or sensor or game developer and so on. So it's really whatever you studied, I think could be immediately useful to the development of VR.
I think that's a good segue. We've got, and plus my scraping through my physics degree with optics gives me very bad memories from years gone by. We have, by the way, we have other members of the working group here today, and at the mic we got Johan from Tobii with a surprise question for us.
Yeah, I have surprise questions. So eye tracking is quickly becoming a hot topic in VR. How do you think eye tracking can enhance VR experience?
Who wants to kick us off on eye tracking?
I can do it. So eye tracking is pretty exciting. I mean, I think we think it's exciting too at Google. I mean, we're looking at some interesting things on other teams, and I'm just looking at what's been done, what I've seen around, and people have been talking about. I think it's really, as I said to the last question too, I have no idea what VR is going to look like in the future. I think even with other platforms that I've worked on before, it's such a new space that where it's going to go is going to be really exciting for everyone, and I hope eye tracking is a big part of that. So.
I'm a bit worried about Cass smiling away at me with my mic.
I was gonna make some witty comment about like you can't keep your hands off that microphone for some reason.
Yeah, there seems to be a Khronos feature discussing choking on mics and so on. Cass.
So I did want to say a couple of things that I think are interesting. I don't really know when eye tracking will become a dominant thing, if it will become a dominant thing. It certainly seems like it's likely to become a dominant thing in the future because social experiences in VR definitely want to know where your eyes are looking, the expression on your face, things like that. That's an obvious area that's important. And the other big one, of course, is the human visual system has a very directionally specific acuity. And so if you know where the eyeball is pointed, you can spend your time making sure those pixels are the best ones and therefore slag off on the rest. To a great degree. So it's hard not to imagine that as we move forward, that information is not going to be useful for multiple reasons. When we get there and how is anybody's guess, mainly because it involves sort of much longer term prognostication, understanding how these kinds of systems will get integrated, more places to do vision processing in a virtual reality subsystem means more things added on the thermal envelope plate, not taken away, and so we have to be concerned about all those things. But it's hard not to see it going in that direction eventually.
So the place where we're at now is really the sort of the physiological min spec, where if you made a display that was much worse than what we're at now, no one would be able to use it. So things are only going to get better from now. And one of those ways it's going to get better is resolution. And what Cass is describing is called foveated rendering, and that's going to be more significant going forward, not less, as the pixel counts go up. So I would expect, I don't know, we're talking about this in the working group. I have no idea if eye tracking will be in or out for that first draft, but long term, it seems like it will definitely be a big part of what's going on.
Nick, and then want to get Johan back in.
All right. I was just going to say, putting on the game developer cap for a second and taking off the engine programmer cap. One of the things that we struggled with in our games for the longest time was trying to match the player's expectation of what they're trying to do in VR with the actual implementation of what they're pulling off in VR. So we spent several weeks on just trying to get people to be able to grab the thing they were intending to grab. And the way we ended up doing that was kind of, we extended the cylinder from the hands, and we took where they were looking. We went through all these iterations of trying to figure out what the player wanted to grab. So it ended up being this crazy half angle between where their hand is pointing and where their head was looking. And we think that eye tracking would be extremely helpful for trying to intuit what the player's intention is as another data point. So I'm quite bullish on it from the game design perspective.
I'd like to add two things, actually. I mean, you mentioned the interaction, social, and foveated rendering. But also you have interpupil distance, so you can calibrate your headset automatically. And also ID, so know who is actually using the headsets is also a fifth very important thing that we think. And
in the odd chance that when we were preparing for the panel, we thought maybe someone from Tobii will ask an eye tracking question, right? But if I can take the question broader, I mean, people are going to ask about haptics and are going to ask about force feedback and a lot of other things. And there's a struggle, see if I can say it diplomatically without Neil pressing the electric shock button. We don't know yet what's going to be in the spec in the initial release and what's not. Because we, on one hand, want to get to something that's truly useful, but we want to get it done as quickly as possible. So that's where we say, is the technology mature enough? Are there enough vendors that are interested in having a nose tracking spec or an eye tracking spec or a haptic spec? And how quickly can we get there?
If we can take the next question, then thank you, Johan.
First off, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Daniel Bray, and I just want to have an open-ended question for any of people that want to answer. But we have technology through Dance Dance Revolution and through karaoke, and we have Bluetooth, and we have the ability to download documents. So my question is, with all that technology, why hasn't there been a game that's establishing presentation type of technology where a interactive people just react to your presentation and how you act, how you move, and how you just present yourself in a wide audience, which would be beneficial for business and for gamers and for people that just want to be able to do stuff in the real world. I mean...
And by presentation, you mean giving talks, the joy of PowerPoint? Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm thinking PowerPoint with VR just brings me dread, but I think I do take your serious point. Does someone want to chip in?
Well, I'm just wondering, why hasn't anyone in the gaming industry designed a game like that? I mean, it's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward.
Not a game, but I just gave a presentation on Thursday at Silicon Valley VR, SVVR meetup, and it was broadcast in alt space. So I was standing in front of a green screen being videoed, and there were people in alt space reacting, and I could see their reactions to my presentation. They weren't in the room presently, but they were watching, and they were engaged in the presentation. So that does exist, and they could see my slides too, so they could see what I was doing.
In Job Simulator, we think presenting to like a camera is actually really important. So we implemented spectator mode, so you can have a camera that looks at you. And a lot of people use that for broadcasting. We're also doing a lot of work in mixed reality and stuff like that. But like, for example, we ended up at a Unity keynote, one of the presenters gave part of the keynote in virtual reality with a spectator camera broadcast onto a screen, right? So there is lots of things that can be done, and even done in different applications. You don't actually have to build something specifically for that, and I think some of those things are going to roll out of different applications like Rec Room and stuff like that.
And I think
I don't remember the specifics, but I think there is actually someone that's built more or less exactly what you're talking about, where it was actually an application that let you practice speaking in front of people so that you could get over the fear of speaking in front of people. So they're, at least in a small way, people are working on this sort of thing all over the place.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think alongside what Kay mentioned, Ada Rose from the Samsung Web VR team put together, and there's a really cool video of an entire conference all putting on cardboards for her presentation. So doing the entire presentation in VR. Next question.
My name is Arson. Probably poked a couple of you before. How is OpenXR going to handle things like, there's a lot of similarity between a lot of the different VR APIs and compositors. How is OpenXR going to handle the differences between those? I think of the, OpenVR hidden area mesh isn't really a feature of the Oculus APIs.
Okay, Cass and I are going to wrestle.
I'll just arm wrestle them both.
Khronos has a long history of settling these sorts of disputes, right? We talk about it as a group. We talk about the merits of our way, why Cass is wrong, and then we eventually come to a consensus. If it comes to it, we have a vote where each company gets one vote, but most of the time it doesn't come to that, and we come to a consensus that really meets the needs of everybody involved.
Yeah, I think we can't talk specifics about what OpenXR is going to have and how we're going to solve particular, deathmatch issues between, say, Google will have one way of wanting to do things, Valve will have a different way, I'll have a different way. But what the Khronos process does is it allows everybody to sort of present the case for how they want to do things, and generally speaking, gather consensus. And so we'll either convince people that the direction that we want to go is right, or we'll lose that battle. And usually it doesn't even have to come to a vote. It's just something that we eventually see, okay, there's no support, or everybody seems to like this direction. And I think we'll see that will play out in OpenXR just as it does in the other APIs that Khronos works on.
I think that the other point worth mentioning is the tradition of Khronos standards to allow vendor-specific optimizations and vendor extensions. We don't just say, this is it, there's no way for you to innovate away from the standard. There is room to explore if you do need platform-specific features.
And I think even outside of the question of standardization, I think there's a lot of value in, being able to sit and hear Joe and Cass and Kay all argue about when to do very specific things in their APIs and hear the justification for it. It helps us as application and middleware developers understand what the hell they were thinking when they did it and why we have to deal with this pain. So even that, I think, is something of a virtuous discussion that helps move the industry forward, even if it's not immediately tractable into the standard.
This is my first time being involved in a big standardization effort, and standardization spelled with an S, by the way. And I've just been really impressed by the amount of respect and goodwill that there is in the group. I know that definitely at Daydream we have a lot of respect for Oculus and Valve and the work that they do, and I feel like I see that coming back from them. Like we just have so much respect, and everyone wants to make this work, and I feel like we can together. I mean, I know more about mobile than I do about desktop for sure, because that's where my experience is. I don't know how to solve a lot of those hard problems, but I feel like together we're going to get farther than any of us could get on our own.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hello, I'm Sebastian from Microsoft. Just thinking about one of the major social stigmas with VR devices, that you get locked out from the rest of the world. So I can imagine myself putting on a Vive and headphones, and my wife gets home, my kids want to get in touch with me, and it's difficult. So is there any standardization work being done on outside-in communication? I know Vive, you have the thing where you can see the bluish kind of world around you when objects get close, but is there any standardization being done on this?
So so what we're trying to do is define that API between the application and the runtime, and between the devices and the runtime. And a lot of things are not included in that. And I think this is one that I would put in that category. They're called implementation details, meaning that that Oculus can do it one way and Google can do it another way, and we can do it a third way. And I would expect a lot of that to, that sort of how do you interact with people who are in the same room with you, or how do they get your attention? Those are the sorts of things that I would expect different implementations to tackle. And then if there ends up being a broadly adopted way to do that, then that would be an appropriate thing to roll into the standard.
So I think one of the things that I would mention to follow on to Joe's comment is that we have to be very careful when scoping an API to focus on what it is we can accomplish and accomplish well. And while Oculus believes very strongly that VR can be a technology and will be a technology that brings people together, that's not the focus of this standardization effort. So it's very important, just not to this standardization effort today.
Thank you.
Without taking the fan away from Khronos, there are multiple different VR standards efforts that looking at kind of video content in particular. So we're looking at the platform, how to standardize the access to HMDs and so on. But there are other efforts as well underway.
G'day guys, my name's Adrian. I was just wondering how the standardization is going with other industries. Like VR is massive in games, but it's also going to be a huge thing for simulation. And I was wondering how the working group is including the simulation community as well to make sure that there's no double up of effort, because they obviously have a lot of working groups as well trying to solve similar problems. They're using the Unreal engines and the Unity engines, and they're using the Vives and the Oculuses to do their type of stuff as well. And I was just wondering how that crossover is going. Has anyone from the simulation industry even approached Khronos to try and join the working group or anything like that?
So the problem of standardization is very acute in simulation, in training and simulation. We do a lot of work with military training and simulation at Sensix, and one of the things that happens is that people say, well, I'm building the simulator and I need it to last for 10 years. Because and in 2 years I may not be able to get a DK2 or whatever I built the original simulator on. So I want something, and the programming team has scattered away by then. So I want something that I can just plug in the next device and work. So I think that's solving a real problem for them. And as far as Khronos, I believe the committee is open to anyone. Anyone that wants to join and feel strongly enough about contributing in various levels is welcome.
So I think that's the task. We need to get more involved. So if there's any of you here in the room, please do get involved in the effort. I just want to just chip in with a question on a topic in terms of controllers, which I think may get a few smiles. So Devin, how easy is it to pan between the different controllers across platforms? How much will that challenge?
Input right now is one of the more challenging things that we end up handling. A lot of it has to do with the shape of the controller in which you're holding and what that affords. So for HTC Vive and for Oculus Touch and for PlayStation Move controllers, we have different hand configurations for each one, and that actually takes quite a bit of time to tweak, because as I change that, how I'm actually grabbing objects gets affected. And then also we have to deal with things like, for example, on Move, there's different orientations that you put that controller in. Like if I turn it so the ball is away from the camera, I'll lose tracking. So we have to end up orienting things in different ways to get around that. So different tracking actually also affects the actual physical input of the device itself. So it is a very challenging thing, and I think it is only going to get harder because I think the amount of innovation in input is going to increase with lots of different types of input. And so as a game developer, I think that's going to be a big challenge moving forward.
Does anyone care to disagree, think it's actually simple?
I think it's even more complex, because when you think about achieving a task or grabbing an object or figuring out where your hand is, yes, you can start from a Daydream controller or a touch or so on, but you can also do it with a Leap Motion or with an external camera or with a bodysuit and so on. So there are so many different ways to get to the same piece of data that you need in the game or in the simulation. So I think that one of the things that I would personally like to see reflected in the standard is focus on what is it that the user is trying to achieve, as opposed to what particular device they're using to achieve it.
And I think there's always going to be that element of, I mean, there's obviously different ergonomics to all the different controllers, and that's widely disparate, and you need to kind of design around those. So I don't think that's something a standard can ever fully encapsulate, but at least we can hope that we can get to a place where we can abstract that data coming up and then let the designers handle that in a universal way. So tracking data and stuff is, you know, coming from known sources through one pipe as opposed to 5 or 10 different pipes coming up. We can at least make that part of their lives easier.
You want to jump in with the next question?
Yes. I'm Nicholas Russell, a recent graduate from the University of Central Florida. First, I just wanted to thank you for holding this panel. And I actually had a question that's somewhat related to the previous one, dealing with locomotion. I was wondering if OpenVR would have a way in the future to handle different forms of locomotion in like a more unified way. Like, for instance, many games have like the ability to use like teleportation, using a physical controller, or just actually moving around in the space. Basically, I'm just wondering if there is plans for, like, say, having a specific method or something that'll allow you to go left, and it'll cover all those different forms of like locomotion that can be done.
And just to make sure you mean OpenXR.
Yes.
We need to start disciplining everyone with it. OpenXR. Yes. Who wants to kick us off?
I would say as an application developer, that's something that is still open for so much research and innovation and whatnot. I mean, as somebody who just released a teleporting game, I would love to see if somebody can find a better solution for that, right? I don't want to, it's very early to lock that in. Plus, it's such a application dependent problem. I mean, teleporting works for our game because we have, you know, robots and magic and stuff like that. But for a much more serious game, I don't necessarily think that's going to be something that, you know, would equally apply to multiple people. But getting the data that you would need to build a teleporting game, like where's the user looking, how do we reorient them to a certain direction, where do we get the motion controller data, that sort of, when do they pull the trigger to teleport, that sort of stuff is ripe for standardization.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very application specific, and everyone's going to want a different implementation. There's no winner in that space, and I don't think any winner in that space for maybe ever, because every little application has a different thing that it needs to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think probably that we didn't have a standard first-person shooter, but particular paradigms do develop, and because they tend to work, and I think that's what we'll see is that applications will find a stable local minimum, and other people will go, hey, that seems to work, and that's how it'll happen. It won't happen at the standards level, I don't think.
I agree that I don't think it will happen at the standards level. As a game developer, I've worked on a number of consoles as well as desktop in my life. And some of the consoles that I worked on were more restrictive as opposed to say that if you click on this controller button, it has to have this syntactic meaning. And I think that some platforms are probably going to go the way of saying, this is the way you move around, this is what the syntactic meaning of movement means on our platform. But I don't think that having OpenXR be the standard should define for that platform what their syntactic meanings are going to be. That's got to be up to the platform.
The area that I think is more interesting is actual physical locomotion. That is a very hard problem to solve, and one that we run up against all the time, because every platform has a different tracking method that has different areas that are available for you to locomote in or to grab objects out of, and that's something that we run up against a lot. Is just like, is this area valid right now, for example? So that's an area that I think that there could be some work done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think we've got 5 minutes left or so in the sessions, last couple of questions.
Great. My name is Heather Mace. I'm with Elfworks, a very, very small indie startup. I'm really happy to find out that there is a standard for VR trying to be rolled out by the Khronos group. Is there any plans on how to make that accessible to indie developers? Because right now, the barrier to entry for small indie companies, I can't even see developing for VR. Is there going to be any sort of outreach or any sort of assistance for indies to buy into the standard?
And I think Neil may be trying to see if I can lip read in addition to your question. I think maybe WebVR. We can mention the advisory panel. Well, I think there's two additions to your questions I want to throw in. One is the advisory panel mechanism we're using in Khronos recently, especially with Vulkan, but also OpenGL and other standards of involving others that want to actually interact and give. You don't get the same level of access as a member company, but at least you get to advise as the spec develops. And also, how much will the API be exposed just to SDKs, or will it be application facing in the end as a result? Where do you think we're going?
Well, I've got an engine I can sell you.
I'm an indie. I can't afford it.
Well, good thing it's free. But I mean, I think this kind of goes back to the original slides. For me, one of the important things about the standardization is there's only a certain addressable market right now, and it takes a lot of effort, especially from an indie developer, in order to ship something on multiple platforms. So the more work we can take out of that from the technical perspective and abstract some of the details, the less work you have to do independently. So it makes it a more economically viable approach in that you have to spend less effort implementing all these different platforms, and you get a larger addressable market from that.
One of the things I wanted to mention is that in some sense the standard itself should be more appealing and accommodating to indie developers, because there will be one to learn, not 5 or 6, and invariably there will be better documentation and a larger number of users that can help people when they have questions, and I expect to see that aspect of things to be great, for a boon for all of us. We won't all be responsible for teaching people our specific API anymore.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final question.
I'm Ryan from Inverse. You guys have introduced a whole new acronym for us all to memorize, the XR. I'm guessing it's because it's a blanket for all of the other acronyms for VR, MR, AR, all that kind of stuff. But so far, no one has actually mentioned anything about AR. I don't know if you guys have any of the cast ARs, the metas, the HoloLenses, and the Magic Leaps I assume there has to be an outreach to the people who are making all of those very disparate display technologies and light fields, and this is a longer question, I think.
Well, I think the first thing we should point out is we're actively trying to recruit anybody and everybody that's willing to add their unique perspective, trying to Borg it up a little bit and get them. But you kind of hit on the point that the XR acronym was very intentional in that, we're starting with VR as kind of a known thing, and we have hardware out there. Right now, we see AR and MR and all the other Rs as something, so we didn't want to paint ourselves into one of those. We wanted to make sure that the common areas, like tracking problems and stuff like that can be addressed in VR space or would be transferable potentially to those others. So again, recruiting for Khronos, but anybody that wants to join and add their unique perspective is more than welcome to make sure that we have a very viable standard that stands the test of time.
And I can say that with the current work that we're doing with OSVR, we do have augmented reality vendors that are using the OSVR software platform to do AR. So it's just a testament to the commonality of requirements. So yeah, maybe they don't need a background on the compositor, and maybe they need some other things, but they are primarily secondary. And I think they're finding that X makes a lot of sense instead of having, multiple different standards for AR, MR, and VR.
We do have the Tango team at Google also. I don't represent them personally, but they have opinions, and they are a Khronos member also. So.
Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap it up there, unless you have any final comments people would like to make before we get kicked out of the room.
Could you add the spelling of standardization to the next agenda?
I think, yeah.
You're going to have to fight with the spec editor on that one. She may have a differing opinion.
Yes, all discussions in spec standards are very simple and straightforward. There's never any circular argument. And just to say thank you all for, firstly, a big thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for attending today. Do actually scrutinize us, talk to us after the session, but throughout the months ahead. The best way to influence the standard is to talk to the member companies, and if you can't be a member company yourself. As Neil mentioned to me, the advisory panel, we're considering putting one together for OpenXR, which is a way for those that actually are consuming our product, consuming our API, to shape it as it becomes more mature. So do get in touch if you're interested in joining that. So thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed the session.